The sirens pierced through Maple Grove's evening quiet, like glass shattering against concrete. 3 patrol cars converged on Elmwood Drive, their red and blue lights painting the manicured lawns in violent streaks of color. Behind white picket fences, neighbors peered through curtains, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of emergency beacons. Malik Thompson froze on the sidewalk, his chess club trophy still clutched in his right hand, backpack heavy with textbooks slung over his shoulder. The 17-year-old honor student had been replaying his victory against the state champion in his head, savoring the moment when his opponent's king fell. Now his stomach dropped as the first officer stepped out of his vehicle, hand resting on his weapon. "That's him!" The voice cracked through the suburban silence like a whip. Margaret Hendricks stood on her porch, pointing directly at Malik with a manicured finger that trembled with righteous indignation. Her platinum blonde hair caught the police lights, and her pink velour tracksuit seemed to glow against the dark evening. "That's the one I called about. He's been walking back and forth, looking at houses, planning something." Officer Rodriguez approached cautiously, his partner flanking from the left. "Son, we need you to put your hands where we can see them." Malik's chess trophy slipped from suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto the concrete. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense air. "I live here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just walking home from school." "Sure you do." Margaret's voice dripped with sarcasm as she descended her porch steps, her designer sneakers clicking against the pavement. "I've lived on this street for 15 years. And I know every family. No one like you belongs here." The words hit Malik like physical blows. He felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced in countless microaggressions throughout his academic career. But this was different. This was dangerous. "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Rodriguez said, though his eyes never left Malik. "Son, what's your name?" "Malik Thompson. I live at 1247 Elmwood Drive. That's my house right there." He gestured toward a colonial-style home 3 houses down, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Margaret let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please, that's the Wilson house. They're a lovely white family. Don't lie to these officers." "My mom remarried," Malik explained, desperation creeping into his voice. "Her name is Sarah Wilson now. Please, you can call her." "I've been watching this kid for 20 minutes," Margaret continued, her voice growing more animated. "He kept looking at the Henderson place, the Martinez house, taking notes, probably planning break-ins. These people, they don't care about our property values." Officer Martinez, the younger of the two, exchanged a glance with his partner. "Do you have any identification on you?" Malik slowly reached for his wallet, movements deliberate and careful. His hands shook as he extracted his student ID and driver's license. The laminated cards felt impossibly heavy in his palm. As Officer Rodriguez examined the ID, Margaret continued her tirade. "I pay good money to live in a safe neighborhood. I have every right to call the police when I see suspicious activity. This boy doesn't belong here." "The address matches," Officer Martinez murmured to his partner, but loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Those are fake," Margaret snapped. "You can get anything printed nowadays. I'm telling you, I know every family on this street." Across the street, Rosa Martinez emerged from her house, her phone already recording. She'd watched the scene unfold from her kitchen window, her heart breaking as she recognized the Thompson boy. He'd helped her elderly mother with groceries just last week, refusing payment with that shy smile of his. "This is wrong," Rosa called out, her accented English carrying clearly across the street. "That boy, he lives here. His mama, she works at the hospital." Margaret whirled around, her face flushed with anger. "Mind your own business," Rosa, this doesn't concern you. When police harass children in my neighborhood, it concerns me. Rosa shot back, her phone steady as she continued filming. More neighbors began emerging from their homes. The Hendersons, an elderly couple who'd lived on Elmwood Drive since the 1970s, stood on their porch, shaking their heads. Mrs. Chen, from the corner house, approached slowly, her own phone out. "Officers," she said politely but firmly. "That young man has been walking this route home from school for 3 years. He's never caused any trouble." Malik felt a surge of gratitude toward his neighbors, but the fear still gripped his chest like a vice. He'd heard too many stories, seen too many news reports. He knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. "I want to see inside that backpack," Officer Rodriguez said, his tone professional but stern. "You need a warrant for that," Malik replied quietly, remembering his constitutional law class discussions. Margaret's eyes lit up with vindication. "See, he knows his rights because he's a criminal. Innocent people don't refuse searches." The absurdity of the statement would have been laughable under different circumstances. Malik had learned about the Fourth Amendment in AP government class just that morning. His teacher, Mr. Jackson, had emphasized that knowing your rights wasn't suspicious. It was citizenship. "Son, if you have nothing to hide," Officer Martinez began. "I don't," Malik interrupted. "But I also don't consent to an illegal search." The crowd of neighbors was growing. Someone had shared Rosa's live video on social media, and, within minutes, the hashtag Elmwood Drive was trending locally. The power of connected communities meant that Sarah Wilson received a notification about her stepson's situation while she was finishing her shift at Mercy General Hospital. "Doctor." Sarah Wilson dropped her stethoscope and ran to her car, her heart pounding with a fear she'd never experienced as a white woman. She'd married Michael Thompson 2 years ago, bringing Malik into her life like a gift she'd never expected. The brilliant, gentle teenager had transformed her understanding of motherhood, teaching her about resilience, intelligence, and the daily courage required to navigate the world as a young black man. Back on Elmwood Drive, the tension was escalating. Margaret had called 911 again, this time claiming that a mob was forming and that she felt threatened by the aggressive neighbors defending Malik. "Ma'am, please calm down," Officer Rodriguez said, but Margaret was beyond reason now. "I pay taxes in this community," she shrieked. "I deserve to feel safe in my own neighborhood. This boy is suspicious, and everyone knows it. You people are just enabling criminal behavior." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Officer Martinez winced at the barely concealed racism in Margaret's tone. Mrs. Henderson, 78 years old and a veteran of the civil rights era, stepped forward. Her voice carried the authority of decades. "Young man," she addressed Malik directly, "your mother must be worried sick. Officers, this child has done nothing wrong except exist in his own neighborhood." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Malik said, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret's face twisted with fury. "Don't thank her. She's enabling this behavior. All of you are. This is exactly what's wrong with this country." Officer Rodriguez was growing uncomfortable with the situation. The young man's story was consistent, his identification legitimate, and the neighbors were vouching for him. But Margaret Hendricks was insistent, and dispatch had already logged 2 calls from her address. "We're going to need you to come to the station for questioning," he finally said to Malik. "Am I under arrest?" Malik asked. "You're being detained for questioning regarding suspicious activity." The words felt like a physical blow. Malik had never been in trouble with the law, had never even received a detention at school. His greatest rebellion had been staying up past midnight to finish calculus homework. "This is insane," Rosa Martinez said, her phone still recording. "He's walking home from chess club. I saw him get off the school bus an hour ago." "Chess club doesn't make someone innocent," Margaret retorted. "Criminals can play chess too." The circular logic was maddening. But Malik knew better than to argue. He'd watched his father navigate similar situations with dignity and composure. Michael Thompson had taught his son that sometimes the best response to injustice was to document it, survive it, and fight it through proper channels. As the officers placed Malik in the back of the patrol car, his chess trophy still lying forgotten on the sidewalk, Sarah Wilson's Honda Civic screeched around the corner. She parked haphazardly and ran toward the commotion, her scrubs still bearing traces of her 12-hour shift in the emergency room. "That's my son!" she shouted, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. "What is happening here?" Margaret's face went pale as she recognized Sarah Wilson from neighborhood association meetings. The cognitive dissonance was visible. The woman she'd served coffee to at community events was claiming the black teenager as her son. "Mrs. Wilson," Officer Rodriguez said respectfully, recognizing her from the hospital where he'd taken victims of car accidents. "Your son was reported for suspicious activity." Suspicious activity. He was walking home from school. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "This is my child. He lives in my house, sleeps in my guest room that we converted to his bedroom, does his homework at my kitchen table." Margaret found her voice again, though it wavered with uncertainty. "I didn't know. I mean, how was I supposed to?" "You were supposed to mind your own business," Mrs. Chen interjected sharply. "Or maybe ask questions before calling the police on a child." The patrol car windows were down, and Malik could hear every word. He watched his stepmother's face cycle through emotions: confusion, anger, heartbreak, and finally, a fierce protectiveness that made his chest tight with gratitude. Sarah approached the patrol car and spoke directly to her son through the window. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay, Mom," Malik said, though they both knew he wasn't. Not really. The word "mom" seemed to break something in Margaret. She'd never heard the Wilson woman mention having a black son, had never seen them together at neighborhood events. The realization that she'd made a catastrophic assumption was beginning to dawn on her. "Officers, I demand you release my son immediately," Sarah said, her voice steady but dangerous. "He has committed no crime, and you have no probable cause to detain him." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we received a report." "You received a report from a woman who doesn't know her own neighbors," Sarah interrupted. "A report based on nothing more than the color of my son's skin." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret wanted to deny it, to claim her call had been about genuine suspicious behavior, but the words died in her throat. She'd seen Malik walking before dozens of times over the past 3 years. She'd simply never connected him to the Wilson house because her assumptions about families, neighborhoods, and belonging had blinded her to reality. Social media was exploding. Rosa Martinez's video had been shared hundreds of times in the first hour. Local news stations were picking up the story. The hashtag, Just Justice for Malik, was trending alongside Jack's Elmwood Drive, and community activists were mobilizing. But the most significant development was happening across town at the district attorney's office. Michael Thompson, Malik's biological father and the city's chief prosecutor, was working late on a case when his phone began buzzing with notifications. The first was a text from his ex-wife, now Sarah Wilson. "They arrested Malik. False call. Elmwood Drive. Come now." Michael Thompson had spent 15 years building his reputation as a fair, tough prosecutor who didn't play politics. He'd sent corrupt politicians to prison, prosecuted hate crimes, and worked tirelessly to reform a criminal justice system he'd seen fail too many people who looked like him. But this was his son. His hands trembled as he watched Rosa Martinez's video on repeat. His brilliant, gentle boy, the kid who'd rather read than watch television, who tutored younger students in mathematics, who'd never been in a fight in his entire life, was sitting in the back of a police car because a neighbor had decided he didn't belong. Michael Thompson grabbed his keys and ran. On Elmwood Drive, the situation was deteriorating. Margaret, now realizing the magnitude of her mistake, was trying to backtrack. "Look, maybe I overreacted, but you have to understand my position. A woman alone, seeing someone I didn't recognize." "You didn't recognize him because you never bothered to learn who your neighbors actually are," Sarah said, her anger controlled but palpable. "You saw a black teenager and immediately assumed criminality. That's not protection, that's prejudice." The crowd had grown to nearly 30 neighbors, and news vans were arriving. The story was spreading beyond social media into traditional news cycles. Elmwood Drive, usually a quiet suburban street, where the biggest controversy might be someone's grass growing too tall, was suddenly the epicenter of a citywide conversation about racial profiling. Officer Rodriguez was on his radio, speaking quietly to his supervisor. The situation had escalated beyond a simple suspicious person call. Media attention, community outrage, and the obvious mistake of the reporting party had created a public relations nightmare for the department. "We're going to release your son with a warning," he finally announced to Sarah. A warning for what she demanded: walking home from school, existing in his own neighborhood. The absurdity of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Malik had committed no crime, violated no law, caused no disturbance. He'd simply walked down a public sidewalk while black, triggering a chain of events that had now involved multiple police officers, dozens of neighbors, and growing media attention. As the officers began processing Malik's release, a black BMW pulled up to the scene with deliberate precision. Michael Thompson stepped out of the driver's seat, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms, facing hostile judges and juries. His tailored suit and measured movements spoke of authority, but his eyes betrayed the fury of a father watching his child being mistreated. The crowd fell silent as he approached. Even Margaret, still standing on her porch, seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic of the evening. "Officers," Michael said, his voice carrying the authority of his position without yet revealing it. "I'm here for my son." Officer Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork, noting the expensive suit and confident bearing. "And you are?" "Michael Thompson, Malik's father." He paused, letting the weight of the moment build. "And the district attorney for this city." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Rodriguez's pen stopped moving. Officer Martinez straightened unconsciously. Margaret's face went from pale to ashen as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Rodriguez said carefully, "we were just releasing your son." "False alarm. False alarm." Michael repeated the words slowly, tasting their inadequacy. "My son was detained, handcuffed, and placed in a patrol car based on a false alarm." The crowd of neighbors watched the scene unfold with the fascination of people witnessing history. Rosa Martinez continued filming, understanding instinctively that this moment would be talked about for years to come. Michael approached the patrol car where Malik still sat, though the door was now open. Father and son locked eyes. And in that moment, 1,000 conversations they'd had about navigating the world as black men crystallized into this single, awful, teachable moment. "Are you all right?" Michael asked softly. "Yes, sir," Malik replied, though his voice was shaky. Michael helped his son out of the patrol car, noting how the 17-year-old's hands still trembled slightly. This brilliant boy who could solve calculus equations in his head, who read philosophy for pleasure, who'd been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, had just experienced the harsh reality that his achievements meant nothing to someone who saw only his skin color. "Mrs. Hendricks," Michael said, turning to face Margaret with the calm intensity that had made him legendary in courtrooms. "I believe you owe my son an apology." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The comfortable anonymity of calling 911 on a suspicious teenager had evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of having to face consequences for her actions. I didn't know," she stammered. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." "Protect it from what?" Michael asked. "From an honor student walking home from chess club. From a young man who's never been arrested, never been in trouble, never done anything more criminal than forgetting to take out the trash." The questions hung in the air, like an indictment. Margaret had no answers, because there were no good answers. She'd profiled Malik based on nothing more than implicit bias and racial stereotypes. "This stops now," Michael continued, his voice carrying the weight of his office. "Not just for my son, but for every child who should be able to walk home safely in their own neighborhood." The news crews had arrived in force now. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Maria Santos, was conducting live interviews with neighbors. The story was no longer just local CNN, and MSNBC had picked up the social media footage. And justice for Malik was trending nationally. Over the following days, the incident became a catalyst for broader conversations about racial profiling, implicit bias, and community accountability. The video of Margaret's 911 call was released through public records requests, revealing the extent of her assumptions and prejudices. But Margaret Hendricks wasn't finished making her situation worse. 3 days after the incident, she appeared on a local radio talk show, defending her actions and claiming she was the real victim of the situation. She accused the neighborhood of reverse racism and suggested that Michael Thompson was using his position to intimidate her. "I have every right to call the police when I see suspicious activity," she said on air. "Now I'm being attacked by the liberal media and these activists just because I tried to protect my community. The real problem is that people like the Thompsons are playing the race card to get special treatment." The interview was a disaster. Her defensive tone and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing further inflamed public sentiment. Social media erupted with calls for accountability, and protesters began gathering outside her house. Michael Thompson watched the interview from his office, his jaw tightening with each word. As a prosecutor, he'd seen this pattern before: the doubling down, the victim mentality, the complete inability to accept responsibility for harmful actions. The breaking point came when Margaret filed a formal complaint against the police department, claiming they'd failed to properly investigate her concerns about Malik. She demanded an official review of the incident, insisting that the officers had been pressured into releasing him because of his father's position. The complaint was absurd, but it forced the city's hand. A formal investigation would require interviews, documentation, and a thorough review of all evidence. More importantly, it would provide a public forum for addressing the broader issues raised by the incident. The City Council announced a special hearing to review the incident and discuss policy changes related to bias-based reporting. The hearing would be held in the largest auditorium at City Hall, with full media coverage and community input. Margaret seemed to view this as a vindication of her position. She hired a lawyer and prepared what she called her defense of community safety and property values. Her attorney, Robert Sterling, specialized in defending people accused of discrimination, a career that had made him wealthy but not necessarily respected. On the night before the hearing, Malik sat in his bedroom working on college application essays. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was writing about overcoming challenges while still processing the trauma of being handcuffed in his own neighborhood. Sarah knocked on his door, entering with a cup of hot chocolate, their ritual during stressful times. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Dad wasn't the DA," Malik said quietly. "What if I was just another black kid with no connections? No one to advocate for me?" It was a question that haunted Michael Thompson as well. His position had protected his son from the worst possible outcomes. But what about the countless other young people who faced similar situations without that privilege? The hearing day arrived with the intensity of a major trial. City Hall was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds gathered outside. News vans lined the street, and social media live streams were broadcasting the proceedings globally. Margaret entered the building, flanked by her attorney and a small group of supporters, mostly older white residents from her neighborhood who shared her views about property values and safety concerns. She wore a navy blue suit and carried herself with the defiance of someone who believed she was fighting a righteous battle. On the other side of the auditorium, Malik sat between his parents, wearing the same suit he'd worn to academic honor ceremonies. Behind them, the community had rallied in unprecedented numbers. Rosa Martinez sat with her extended family. Mrs. Henderson, despite her age, had insisted on attending. Mr. Chen had closed his restaurant early to be there. The high school chess club attended in matching t-shirts reading, "We Stand with Malik." Council President Angela Washington called the hearing to order. A former civil rights attorney herself, she understood the broader implications of what they were addressing. "This hearing will examine the incident on Elmwood Drive and its implications for our community," she announced. "We will hear from all parties and consider policy changes to prevent similar situations." Margaret's attorney spoke first, attempting to frame her 911 call as reasonable community vigilance. Mrs. Hendricks observed behavior she considered suspicious and followed proper protocol by contacting authorities. She cannot be held responsible for assumptions made by others about her motivations. But when the 911 recording was played for the packed auditorium, the weakness of that argument became clear. Margaret's voice, sharp with assumption and prejudice, filled the room. "There's a black male, probably 17 or 18, walking back and forth on Elmwood Drive. He's looking at houses, probably casing them. He doesn't belong in this neighborhood." The words, "he doesn't belong," echoed through the silent auditorium. There was no mention of any criminal behavior, no description of any specific threatening actions, just the presence of a black teenager in a predominantly white neighborhood. When it was time for community input, the line of speakers stretched around the building. One by one, neighbors testified about Malik's character, his helpfulness, his academic achievements. Teachers spoke about his leadership in the chess club and his tutoring of younger students. Rosa Martinez stood at the microphone, her voice steady despite her emotion. "I have watched this boy grow up. He helps my mother with groceries. He helps elderly neighbors with yard work. When my daughter needed help with algebra, Malik spent 3 hours at our kitchen table teaching her. This is who Margaret Hendricks called the police on." Mrs. Henderson's testimony was particularly powerful. "I lived through the civil rights era. I thought we had made more progress than this. When I see what happened to this young man, this brilliant, kind young man, I am reminded that we still have work to do." But the most impactful moment came when Malik himself took the microphone. The auditorium fell completely silent as the 17-year-old who had become the center of a national conversation prepared to speak. "My name is Malik Thompson," he began, his voice clear despite the emotion. 3 weeks ago, I was walking home from chess club, thinking about the match I just won and the homework I needed to finish. I was happy. I felt safe in my own neighborhood." He paused, looking directly at Margaret, who sat with her arms crossed defensively. "Mrs. Hendricks doesn't know me. She's never spoken to me, never asked my name, never wondered about my story. She saw my skin color and decided I was a threat. That decision changed everything." The teenager's composure was remarkable, but his parents could see the cost of maintaining it. "I don't want other kids to go through what I experienced. I don't want parents to fear for their children's safety just because they're walking home from school." When Malik finished speaking, the auditorium erupted in sustained applause. Even some of Margaret's supporters seemed moved by his dignity and eloquence. Margaret was given an opportunity to respond. Her attorney advised against it, but her pride and defensiveness overruled his counsel. She approached the microphone with the defiance of someone who refused to accept responsibility for her actions. "I did what any concerned citizen would do," she said, her voice defensive and sharp. "I saw suspicious behavior and reported it. I refuse to apologize for trying to protect my community." The response was immediate and hostile. The auditorium filled with boos and shouts of disapproval. Council President Washington called for order, but the damage was done. Margaret's complete lack of remorse had been displayed for the entire community to witness. The evidence presented during the hearing was overwhelming. Security cameras from neighboring houses showed Malik walking normally down the sidewalk, never lingering at any property, never engaging in any behavior that could reasonably be considered suspicious. His route was direct from the bus stop to his house, with no detours or unusual stops. The police department's internal investigation revealed that the responding officers had followed protocol, but acknowledged that the situation could have been handled more sensitively. They recommended additional bias training for all officers and revised procedures for responding to suspicious person calls. More damaging for Margaret was the revelation that this wasn't her first questionable 911 call. Records showed a pattern of complaints about minorities in the neighborhood, a delivery driver who didn't look right, a landscaping crew that seemed suspicious, a black family visiting neighbors who might be casing the area. Michael Thompson's closing statement was measured but powerful. "This hearing isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about creating a community where children can walk home safely, regardless of their race. It's about building bridges instead of walls." The council's decision was unanimous. They passed a resolution condemning bias-based reporting and established new protocols for handling such calls. Police would be required to document the specific behavior reported, not just the caller's conclusions about suspiciousness. More significantly, the city announced a civil rights investigation into Margaret's pattern of discriminatory reporting. The state attorney general's office opened its own inquiry into potential hate crime charges. The financial consequences for Margaret were swift and severe. Her employer, a real estate company that prized its community reputation, terminated her employment after the hearing. Several clients canceled their contracts, citing her behavior as incompatible with their values. The Thompson family filed a federal lawsuit alleging civil rights violations. The case was settled within 6 months for an undisclosed amount, with Margaret required to issue a public apology and attend sensitivity training. But the most significant change was in the community itself. The Elmwood Drive incident became a catalyst for broader conversations about implicit bias, community accountability, and the everyday experiences of minorities in predominantly white neighborhoods. The high school where Malik attended established a civil rights scholarship in his name. The city council created a community relations board to address bias incidents. The police department's new training program became a model for other municipalities. Margaret eventually moved away from Elmwood Drive, unable to face the daily reminders of her actions and their consequences. Her house sold for below market value, with many potential buyers unwilling to purchase the home of someone who had become synonymous with neighborhood racism. On the first anniversary of the incident, the city held a community unity celebration in the park near Elmwood Drive. Malik, now a freshman at Yale University, returned home to speak at the event. His chess trophy, the one that had fallen forgotten on the sidewalk that terrible evening, was displayed as a symbol of dreams deferred but not destroyed. A year ago, I learned that excelling in school, following the law, and walking in my own neighborhood wasn't enough to protect me from prejudice, he told the diverse crowd gathered in the park. But I also learned that communities can choose to stand together against injustice. Rosa Martinez, now a member of the City Council, introduced the new Community Policing Initiative. Mrs. Henderson, despite her age, had become a vocal advocate for racial justice education in schools. The chess club had grown from 12 members to over 50, with students from across the city participating regardless of race or economic background. Michael Thompson used his position as district attorney to push for state-level reforms in hate crime prosecution and bias training for law enforcement. His son's experience had transformed his approach to justice, adding a personal dimension to his professional mission. The ripple effects extended far beyond their city. The case study of the Elmwood Drive incident was taught in criminal justice programs across the country. Social workers, police officers, and community leaders studied the situation as an example of how individual prejudice could escalate into community crisis and how communities could respond with unity and reform. As the sun set on the anniversary celebration, Malik walked down Elmwood Drive one more time before returning to college. The same route that had once filled him with terror now represented something different, a path toward justice, community, and the hard-won understanding that change was possible when people chose courage over comfort. He paused at the spot where his chess trophy had fallen, where his childhood innocence had shattered against the reality of prejudice. A small memorial plaque had been installed there, reading, "In recognition of Malik Thompson and all young people who face injustice with dignity, may we build communities worthy of their dreams." The houses along Elmwood Drive glowed with warm light as families gathered for dinner, homework, and the ordinary moments that make up a life. In one of those houses, a new family had moved in, the Johnsons, a black family with 2 young children. They'd chosen the neighborhood specifically because of how the community had responded to injustice, seeing it as a place where their children could grow up safely. Margaret Hendricks was gone, but her legacy lived on in the changes her prejudice had inadvertently sparked. Sometimes the most powerful catalyst for progress comes from the very people who tried to prevent it. In trying to exclude, she had created inclusion. In trying to silence, she had amplified voices. In trying to divide, she had ultimately unified a community around shared values of justice and dignity. As Malik walked toward his parents' house for dinner, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. The teenager who had once feared walking in his own neighborhood had become a voice for change, a symbol of resilience, and a reminder that justice was not just about punishment. It was about transformation. The chess trophy sat on his childhood desk upstairs, no longer a symbol of an interrupted evening, but a reminder that the most important victories often come not from the games we play, but from the stands we take when the games really matter. And in the end, the community of Elmwood Drive had proven that when people choose to see each other's humanity instead of their differences, even the darkest evenings can give way to new dawns.